The Shawnee had been tracking both armies from their departure, keeping close watch on their movements. To prevent the two armies from uniting, Chief Cornstalk decided to strike the Southern Army first. On the night of October 9th, approximately 500 Shawnee warriors stealthily crossed the Ohio River near the Kanawha, preparing for a surprise attack at dawn. On the early morning of October 10th, a few militiamen left their camp in search of fresh game to supplement their meat rations. About 2 miles from Point Pleasant, they unexpectedly encountered Shawnee warriors spread across a 5-acre field. The warriors killed one of the soldiers, but the others escaped and quickly alerted their camp. In response, Colonel Lewis dispatched 2 contingents of 150 men each, believing they were confronting a large scouting party. Although their surprise attack had been compromised, Chief Cornstalk pressed forward with the assault, initiating the Battle of Point Pleasant. The Battle of Point Pleasant, which unfolded with intense and brutal fighting, was a critical turning point in the escalating conflict between Native American tribes and British settlers. To fully grasp its significance, it's essential to examine the broader historical context of the 1700s, a century characterized by continuous expansion and conflict. From the early 1700s, British colonizers steadily pushed westward, encroaching on Native American lands. This expansion reached a pivotal moment with the Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1768. The treaty, negotiated between British officials and the Iroquois Confederacy, extended colonial claims into lands now part of West Virginia and Kentucky. However, the Shawnee and many other Native American tribes who hunted and shared these territories did not consent to the agreement. This disregard for the Shawnees' interests fueled rising tensions. The Ohio Valley, with its abundant resources and strategic value, became a focal point of conflict. As settlers advanced deeper into this region, Native American tribes fiercely resisted, fighting to protect their ancestral lands and way of life. These mounting hostilities set the stage for the violent confrontation at Point Pleasant. Prominent Virginians, including figures like George Washington, had significant financial stakes in Western lands, driving their push for expansion and land speculation, often at the expense of Native American communities. Meanwhile, Native Americans, particularly the Shawnee and the Mingos, were resolute in defending their homelands, leading to a cycle of escalating violence with settlers. This struggle came to a head in 1774, a year marked by relentless conflict. During the spring and summer, with frequent raids and skirmishes on the frontier. In October of that year, these tensions culminated in the Battle of Point Pleasant. Seeking to quell Native resistance and secure westward expansion, Virginia's governor, Lord Dunmore, launched a military campaign against Shawnee villages north of the Ohio River. He dispatched 2 armies for the operation. The first, led by Colonel Andrew Lewis and numbering 1,000 men, marched southwest from Camp Union, located in present-day Lewisburg, West Virginia, advancing toward the Ohio River to confront the Shawnee. This campaign set the stage for the decisive clash at Point Pleasant. The second force, led by Lord Dunmore himself and comprising 1,700 men, advanced from Fort Pitt. Meanwhile, Colonel Andrew Lewis's army reached Point Pleasant at the mouth of the Kanawha River on October 6th. The Shawnee, having scouts closely monitoring both armies from the outset, were well aware of their movements. To prevent the two forces from uniting, Chief Cornstalk made the strategic decision to strike the Southern Army first. On the night of October 9th, around 500 Shawnee warriors crossed the Ohio River above the Kanawha, planning a surprise attack before sunrise. Early on the morning of October 10th, several militiamen left the camp to hunt for fresh game to supplement their rations. About 2 miles from Point Pleasant, they stumbled upon Shawnee warriors dispersed across a 5-acre field. The Shawnee killed 1 soldier, but the survivors managed to flee back to camp and raise the alarm. Colonel Lewis, believing the enemy to be a large scouting party, quickly dispatched 2 contingents of 150 men each to engage them. Despite the loss of their intended element of surprise, Chief Cornstalk decided to launch the attack anyway. Recognizing the militia was divided and that his warriors collectively outnumbered the separated contingents, he pressed forward. The result was an intense and brutal engagement, marking the start of the Battle of Point Pleasant and a pivotal moment in the broader conflict. As the militia advanced nearly half a mile around 6:30 a.m., the Shawnee launched a devastating ambush on the columns, delivering heavy casualties to the leading ranks. The sudden and ferocious attack caused the Eastern Militia column to falter and retreat under the pressure of the Shawnee assault. Seizing the opportunity, the Shawnee redirected their concentrated fire toward the Western column, intensifying the chaos. For about 30 minutes, the steady sound of gunfire and the sight of wounded soldiers returning to camp made it clear to Colonel Lewis that his forces were engaged in an unexpected full-scale battle. Chief Cornstalk's well-timed ambush had caught him off guard at Point Pleasant. Reacting quickly, Lewis dispatched the bulk of his army to the front lines, sending 200 reinforcements to stabilize the faltering militia. The Colonials began forming a continuous defensive line, stretching from the Ohio River on the left flank to the Canoe River on the right. As individual soldiers arrived from the camp, they filled gaps in the line, strengthening the defense. Meanwhile, the Shawnee pressed forward with relentless determination. Warriors and soldiers alike took cover behind rocks, trees, and stumps, each fighting a personal battle in the dense fog and smoke that enveloped the battlefield. The intensity of the fight escalated as the Shawnee pushed closer, leading to brutal hand-to-hand combat. Neither side could gain an advantage, and neither was willing to retreat. Rifles and muskets became improvised clubs, while tomahawks, knives, fists, and feet turned the conflict into a desperate melee. Amid the chaos, Chief Cornstalk's towering figure stood out, both as a leader and a warrior. His voice echoed across the battlefield, urging his warriors to be strong. Be strong. He was everywhere, directing the fight and inspiring his men with his bravery. Despite his efforts, the militia held firm, and the ferocity of the battle showed no sign of subsiding. The militia took shots at Chief Cornstalk, hoping to take down the Shawnee leader, but none found their mark. The fierce struggle persisted for hours, with each side surging forward and then falling back. Shawnee warriors taunted the militiamen, shouting, "Why don't you whistle now?" mocking the fiefs that had earlier called the militia companies to muster. However, with their flanks secured by the Ohio and Canoe rivers, the militia was protected from the Shawnees' preferred tactic of flanking and attacking from the rear. To the soldiers' surprise, the Shawnee, led by their chiefs, Red Hawk, Blue Jacket, Black Hoof, Chief Cornstalk, and his son, opted for bold frontal assaults. The river bottomlands, littered with driftwood and rocky outcrops, provided cover for both sides. By around 1 p.m., a concerted push by the militia gained them control of a ridge with abundant logs and rocks, creating an excellent defensive position. Slowly, the Shawnee retreated to a second ridge stretching from the Ohio River to a swamp, and the intensity of the gunfire began to diminish. As the ground fog lifted, the militia's long rifles, with their superior range and accuracy, became more effective. The brutal hand-to-hand combat of the morning gave way to long-range shooting in the afternoon. Despite being outnumbered and facing growing casualties, Chief Cornstalk made a rare and bold decision for a native force. He chose to hold his position. He reasoned that if the Shawnee retreated and allowed Lewis and Dunmore's armies to unite, they would stand no chance of victory against the combined colonial forces. Later in the afternoon, Colonel Andrew Lewis attempted a maneuver to tip the battle in the militia's favor. He ordered 3 companies to flank the Shawnee line. These units quietly withdrew from the main line and moved along the Canoe riverbank, using its cover to stay hidden. Following the path of Crooked Creek, they emerged on a slight ridge behind the Shawnee's left flank and opened fire. This unexpected attack threatened to destabilize the Shawnee position, marking a critical turning point in the Battle of Point Pleasant. The sudden assault by the flanking militia force caught the Shawnee warriors off guard. Chief Cornstalk, well informed by his scouts about a second colonial column advancing toward Point Pleasant, likely mistook the flanking force for this larger reinforcement. Realizing the precariousness of their position, Cornstalk began a strategic withdrawal. He selected his best warriors to cover the retreat, ensuring all wounded were safely carried across the Ohio River. Among the injured was his brother Silverheels, who was carried back by their sister, Nonhelima. The majority of the Shawnee dead were committed to the river, and with calculated precision, Cornstalk and his warriors retreated into the forest beyond the Ohio. When Lord Dunmore arrived around midnight, he found the colonial camp in disarray. The wounded, many in critical condition, were suffering terribly due to a lack of adequate medical care. The battle had taken a heavy toll on Colonel Lewis's forces, with 75 men killed and 140 wounded, nearly a quarter of his army. The Shawnee casualties were harder to determine, as they typically carried off their dead and injured, but estimates placed their losses at about 50. Among the Shawnee fallen was Pucksinwah, the father of the future leader Tecumseh. A week after the Battle of Point Pleasant, Colonel Lewis and his men, having rested and recovered, crossed the Ohio River and marched north to rendezvous with Lord Dunmore at Camp Charlotte, a fortified site near the main Shawnee towns on the Scioto River. Despite Cornstalk's willingness to continue the fight, the combined strength of the two colonial armies proved too overwhelming for the Shawnee. Other tribal leaders, seeing no path to victory, sought peace. In late October, they signed the Treaty of Camp Charlotte. Under the terms of the treaty, Cornstalk agreed to release all white prisoners held by the tribes and vowed to cease hunting south of the Ohio River and attacking boats on the river. In return, Dunmore promised that no more settlers would enter Kentucky and that no colonists would cross north of the Ohio. While the treaty brought a temporary peace, many on both sides doubted its longevity. With the conflict seemingly resolved, the Virginia militiamen returned home, and the Shawnee retreated to their villages, bracing for what the future might hold.